Hi everyone, so today we're going to be learning about completing the square. Now, in class we've been talking about how to solve a quadratic equation, and actually let's talk about that for a second. So a quadratic equation is any equation in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So a quadratic equation is where the highest exponent is a 2, and up to now, we've been learning to solve this by factoring. But factoring is only one way to solve a quadratic equation. The second way to solve a quadratic equation is by completing the square. Completing the square. Now, it's a process that I find actually to be quite easy. So I decided to go through the process with you and then have you try one. Okay, so to complete the square, first it's got to be a quadratic equation. And you want to set y equal to 0 if it is not already. So this could have been y, and if it was y, we would set it equal to 0 because when we solve a quadratic equation, remember we're looking for the x-intercepts or the roots of the equation. Then the first thing I always want to do is I want to make sure there's a coefficient of 1 in front of the x squared. If not, we're going to divide out the coefficient of 1 to make it a coefficient of 1, and I'll show you how to do that. All right. Then to get it complete the square ready, because it's not ready to complete the square ready yet, we add the constant. Remember, the c is the constant. We add that to the other side. So I'm going to do that to get it complete the square ready, but I'm going to leave room. So complete the square ready means get that constant to the other side and then leave some room here. Then we have to make the left a perfect square trinomial. So here's the completing the square part. So the first thing we do is we take half of 8. Half of 8, we disregard the sign. Half of 8 is 4. And then we square it, which is 16. So that 16, we put in that missing space. But whatever we add to one side, we have to add to the other side of the equation. All right, now we are going to write that left side as a perfect square trinomial. It is a perfect square trinomial. Now we're going to write it as the square of a binomial. The square of a binomial would be x minus 4. Remember, quantity squared. Remember, we take the square root of that term, the square root of that term, and the sine of the middle term. And then on the other side, we simplify it, so we get 18. All right, so now we solve by taking the square root of both sides. So I'm going to actually rewrite it for myself. So we solve by taking the square root of both sides. Take the square root of both sides, and we get x minus 4 equals. Now we know when we take the square root of both sides that we have to consider the absolute value, so there's always going to be a positive and a negative answer. And we've been practicing simplifying square roots, so we actually have to do that as well. We know that 18 can be rewritten as the square root of 9 times the square root of 2, which would be 3 root 2. All right, now to solve, we bring the 4 to the other side, but we always want to put it in front of the plus minus. So x equals 4 plus or minus 3 root 2. And that is the solution to our quadratic equation. So that is our zeros, our two zeros, or we could also call them their roots, and or our x-intercepts if it has it. All right, so now I want you to try the process. Okay, so you're going to try in this next problem. You're going to complete the square. Now I want you to try it, pause. If you have to go back to the video and watch it again, do so. Try it, and then check your work here. All right, so you're back. So the first thing I did was I set it equal to 0. Now I always like to put the 0 on the right side, so I did that. Then I made it complete the square ready by adding the 8 to both sides. I left room after the 6, and I got 8. I took half of 6, which was 3, and I squared it, which was 9, so I added 9. But whatever I did to one side, I had to do to the other. Then I wrote this perfect square trinomial as the square of a binomial. That worked out to be x plus 3. I simplified this side, so I added them, and I got 17. I solved by taking the square root of both sides, and I got x plus 3 equaled. We took the square root of both sides, so we have to consider both the positive and the negative. root 17. Root 17 does not simplify because it does not have a perfect square in it, so we leave it. Then we subtract 3 to the other side, putting it in front of the plus minus. And we just solve for our zeros, our roots, or possibly x-intercepts. So -3 plus or minus the square root of 17. Now remember, this actually means x equals -3 plus root 17 and x equals -3 minus root 17. All right, guys, so that's how you complete the square.